we're reading the story, Whooping Cranes in Danger. It's going to be in your big reading book. We're going to start on page 172. All right? 172. As we read, make sure that you have your worksheet out too, because we'll be going over some of it together. All right? So, put your name at the top. And then we'll be ready to begin. Our essential question down here at the bottom is, how can people help animals survive? Read about whooping cranes. Find out how a group of scientists are helping these birds survive. This right here is a picture of a whooping crane. All right? Now, we're actually going to talk about Wisconsin a little bit in this story, so you'll be able to find out more about our state. There are many types of heroes. Superheroes in comics catch bad guys. Astronauts risk their lives to explore space. Doctors devote their careers to finding cures for dreadful diseases. Our story has heroes too. Scientists and their helpers are saving the whooping cranes. Whoopers need help. See if they're a cute little baby whooping crane. Without places to get food and raise families, the whooping crane could not survive. Right? That's like any animals that we're learning about in science. Without food, these animals are not going to survive. Whoopers need help. Long ago, whooping cranes lived all over North America. Then, people started hunting them. Farmers and builders took over the marshes these birds called home. Whoopers were losing the resources they need. By 1841, only 15 whooping cranes were left in the wild. It looked as if they could die out forever. Some people refused to let this happen. The government reserved land for these cranes to live on. Hunters could not enter this wildlife refuge. Scientists guarded this tiny flock in Texas. 70 years later, its population has grown to 200 birds. But one flock is not enough. A disease or storm could wipe it out completely. Scientists decided to create a new flock in Wisconsin. Two groups of birds are safer than one. Okay? So we had two groups of birds. First one, this tiny flock in Texas was guarded and stayed safe so that it could continue to grow. Then we're going to see how scientists are starting another group in Wisconsin. A tough problem. Building a new flock of whoopers is harder than it seems. These cranes are born up north. Then they migrate south in fall to avoid the cold winter. Then in spring, they fly back north for the summer. Who says birds aren't smart? Scientists had a big problem to solve. They couldn't just grab some whoopers from the first flock to start a new one. When returning north, adult birds will only go back to the place they were born. Think about that. A bird remembers where it's born and goes back to that same area. How amazing is that? So all members of the second flock had to be born in the new spot. How could that happen? Who would their parents be? A clever solution. 11 eggs were about to hatch in spring of 2001. Their parents were ready to welcome these chicks to the world. Their puppet parents, that is. That's a puppet! Look here at the bottom. This puppet takes the place of this whooping crane chick's mother. All right, this is a puppet right here. This is not a real whooping crane. So they had to take these eggs that were hatched, and let's turn the page. All right, now we're at the top of page 176. Scientists had to raise the chicks, but the whoopers weren't supposed to get used to people. Right? If the whoopers got used to people, they wouldn't be able to survive in the wild anymore. The birds needed to be wild to stay safe. So humans pretended to be whooping cranes. They wore white costumes to hide their faces and bodies. They wore puppets on their arms to deal with the chicks, so they never had human hands touch the whoopers. They just used a puppet on their hand. The caretakers never spoke near the birds. They talked to the chicks by playing tapes of real whooping cranes. They also had real whoopers in refuge. In the refuge, the chicks needed to know what actual grown-up whooping cranes looked like. Caretakers used the puppets to teach the chicks the same skills that real parents would. The puppets showed them where to swim and where to sleep. They even taught the chicks how to get along with other cranes. The puppet could teach most things, but they couldn't teach the chicks how to fly. Look here, you can see a picture of it at the bottom. See how those puppets on the end of their arm? That's what they would use to deal with the cranes so that they never felt a human hand touch them. All right, let's look at number 1. Why did scientists wear white costumes and use puppets? Well, the scientists wanted the whooping cranes to be able to survive in the wild. Right? They wanted to be able to survive in the wild. They couldn't have done that if they got used to humans. Page 177. The biggest parent of them all. Pilots of ultralight planes could do the job. They put on their costumes and got to work. At first, the plane just rolled across the ground. A pilot played a special crane call, which meant, "Come on, follow me!" That's exactly what the chicks did. Of course, the treats given out by the pilot's puppet helped a lot. As the days passed, the plane sped up. The chicks did too. Flapping their wings helped them go faster. It also made their wings stronger. At last, they ran fast enough and flapped hard enough, and up they went. Soon, the cranes were flying almost every day. They had to. Fall was coming. They had to be strong enough to migrate more than 1,200 miles to Florida. Let's look here. The whoopers learned to follow the ultralight on the ground and in the air. They had to learn to recognize their Wisconsin home from the air because the plane would not lead them back the next spring. Right? They just have to remember where they go because birds always go back to where they came from. Operation Migration. Finally, the big day came. This experiment started with 11 eggs. 2 chicks had gotten sick and died. 1 couldn't fly well enough and moved to a zoo. The other 8 whoopers were ready to go. 2 ultralights revved their engines. 1 would lead the birds. The other would track down cranes that strayed from the flock. The planes took off. The birds did too. They were on their way. Planes and birds were only part of the migration. A crew drove south too. The birds had to eat and rest each night. Scientists had chosen safe places along the way. The crew rushed ahead to set up pens for them to stay in. You can see here, this ultralight plane led the whooping cranes to their winter home in Florida. So we got a plane down here. This is leading them, and then there's another one that's going to find any stray ones and bring them back. The trip was hard. The cranes flew up to 95 miles on good days, and only 20 on bad ones. Often, the rain or wind kept them from flying at all. One sad night, a giant storm ripped their pen apart. Caretakers spent hours searching and calling for their whoopers. All were fine, except one. He had flown into a power line and died. After 48 days, the plane flew over the birds' winter home in Florida. A caretaker on the ground played the whooping crane call. The whoopers swooped in for a landing. The first part of the journey was a success. See a map at the bottom. That's one of those text features that expository text has to help you understand the information. From Wisconsin down to Florida. A warm winter. What was one of the first things whoopers learned about Florida? Crabs are delicious. The shells were hard, but the meat was soft. Puppet parents helped the whoopers learn to peck them apart. At first, the cranes stayed in a pen as big as a football field. It even had a pond with a fake whooper parent in it to make them feel safe. Actually, they were safer in the pond. Cranes usually sleep in the water at night. Splashing sounds warn them if a predator is nearby. In time, caretakers took the top off the pen. The cranes flew out to explore more of their new home. Caretakers hid, watching them enjoy yummy shrimp and snails. Generally, the whoopers returned to the pen at night. Sometimes they didn't. 2 cranes were killed by bobcats. Now, there were 5. The whoopers learned to eat new foods, such as crabs, in their winter home in Florida. So notice this is a caption that gives you information about this picture here. You can see the whooping crane eating a crab right there. In the spring, the birds started eating more. That was a good sign. They were storing energy for a trip north. Still, the scientists wondered, would the cranes know when to leave? Right, there's a caption that says the same thing with the birds here. Homeward bound? One day, caretakers heard radio sounds. The cranes had leg bands that sent out these sounds. The whoopers were on the move. Caretakers jumped in 2 trucks to follow the signals. They had to hurry. The trip home would be much faster. Air has currents just like water does. Birds ride these currents the same way that surfers ride waves. The cranes traveled more than 200 miles that very first day. They were headed north, but would they remember their route? Soon, scientists had another thing to worry about. One crane had left the group. A truck turned to track her. Where was she going, and why? Day by day, I'm on page 182. Day by day, the cranes kept flying. Then, the group of 4 reached Lake Michigan. They began to circle. Oh no, thought the trackers. They do not know which way to go. The whoopers kept circling around and around. After 2 hours, they finally turned west. They were on course. 11 days after leaving Florida, these 4 cranes came in for a landing. They were very close to the pen they grew up in. What about that last crane? She ended up visiting a flock of sandhill cranes for a while. Sandhill cranes are relatives of whooping cranes. 2 weeks later, she came back home to the refuge. The number of whooping cranes is beginning to grow again. A new beginning. This first migration was finished, but the whooping crane's recovery had just begun. The next year, these 5 cranes flew south by themselves. The ultralights were busy leading 16 new chicks. The planes still lead migrations each fall, but now whooping crane parents are leading their own chicks down south. Some of these chicks have grown up enough to have babies of their own. The whooping crane is still threatened. It remains one of America's most endangered birds, but scientists are hopeful. Luckily, the flock keeps getting bigger. The end. Let's go ahead and take a look at our questions. Number 2, how do you know that Whooping Cranes in Danger is expository text? What text features do you see? Remember, expository text gives information about a subject and has text features such as headings, maps, captions that teach you more about the subject. So how do you know Whooping Cranes in Danger is an expository text? Go ahead and write your answer. Then you can go ahead and pause and play the video when you're done. Number 3. What is the author's point of view about the scientists who helped the whooping cranes? Do you agree with her? Why or why not? What's her point of view? Those scientists good? Are they bad? Are they doing something good? Well, she thought the scientists were doing something good. So that's the first part. The second part says, do you agree? Why or why not? So make sure you say, do you agree? Do you think they were doing something good? Or do you think, who cares? Should just let the whooping cranes die off. And finally, number 4. Find the word hopeful on page 183. How does the suffix full, remember which means full of, help you figure out the meaning? So hopeful, what does hopeful mean? When you are done, you can put that back in your Wednesday folder and mark it off of your weekly checklist.